Well, I am doing today's Peter Schiff Show podcast with an hour of trading left to go in the U.S. stock market. Normally, I wait for the market to close and then I do a podcast so I can kind of talk about what happened during the day. But this is such, I think, an important day that I wanted to go live while the market was still trading so I can comment on what happens during the final hours. And I'm not really talking about the Dow Jones or the NASDAQ, because what's going on there, I think, is really irrelevant to the bigger picture, which is what's playing out in precious metals, in the dollar, and probably more significantly for my clients and me personally, in gold and silver mining stocks. Because today, I think intraday, I really saw some major institutional flows coming in across the board into these mining stocks. They all kind of surged at the same time. There was no news, but I think a bunch of money came in, and then there was a pullback, and of course then we just gradually made new highs, and we have some magnificent gains today in the mining stocks that led the metal. In fact, the metals were barely up earlier in the day when the gold and silver stocks were so strong. The metals eventually followed the stocks higher, which is the way it should be. And as I'm recording this podcast here with, a little under an hour to go on Thursday, gold is at record territory. It's trading around 4,920. We are less than $100 away from $5,000 gold. And, we're still not finished with January. Silver is over 96, up better than $3 today. Remember, last year I said that silver would hit $100 an ounce this year. I didn't realize it would do it in January, but that's what's going to happen. And the catalyst, I think, for today's surge, which is also being accompanied by some across-the-board weakness in the U.S. dollar, and it's really a flight out of the dollar into gold and silver. And I think the institutions now are recognizing, finally, maybe the significance of this and how cheap the gold and silver mining stocks are, which is why they're making a mad dash to buy them today, and why you're seeing so many gains of 5 or 10% or more across the board in the mining stocks. They're pretty much all at new multi-year highs today. But the catalyst was Donald Trump's speech at Davos yesterday and his announcement later in the day that followed that speech. And of course, he also made another speech the day before, just a press conference to commemorate his first year in office. But I think the bigger speech on the world stage was the one that happened yesterday at Davos. Now, the biggest news that initially came out of that speech was that Donald Trump was not going to invade Greenland. He wasn't going to take it by force, which is what he had been stating he was going to do. In fact, the last podcast I did was specifically on this fact that Donald Trump was threatening to take by force Greenland if he couldn't negotiate a deal for the U.S. to own Greenland. He was going to take it because we could, because we were the biggest, strongest economy with the biggest military, and if we want something, we take it, right? And I talked about the dangers of that. And I think there were some people who recognized that this was a big problem. And so before Trump took the microphone yesterday, gold was up over $100. Right? So, it had been going up every day. At that point on Wednesday, it was up more than $250 on the week. Now it's up over $300, I think. It's up over $300 so far this week. Unbelievable. But, before he took the microphone, gold was up 100, silver was up as well. The gold and silver stocks were up. As soon as he said that he wasn't going to take Greenland by force, the markets breathed a sigh of relief. You saw the stock market, the Dow, which was negative, rallied. and the medals came off. And what Donald Trump said was that the U.S. still needs Greenland. We need to own Greenland. We want Greenland. And we are going to negotiate a deal with Denmark, right, to get Greenland. And he said that if we can get Greenland, then we will be grateful or appreciative or something like that. And then he said, but if we don't get it, we'll remember. That's what he said. We'll remember. Not we'll invade. Our troops are coming in, but we'll be happy if we get Greenland. And if we don't, well, I'm going to hold a grudge, right? Because who knows what that means, right? If I don't get it, things are not going to go so well for you, right? I mean, you piss me off. You're on my bad side, is basically what he said. But that's a lot better than being on the other side, of the guns, right? So, and I believe that cooler heads at the White House probably prevailed in convincing the president behind the scenes that invading Greenland was not such a good idea. In fact, what wasn't a good idea was even discussing it as if it were possible, letting the world know that this is something that we might do. Because even though Trump, tacoed out on this invasion, the seed is planted in the minds of everybody. Wait a minute. This time they didn't do it. What about next time? Right? We got to do something to make sure there is no next time. Now, and in fact, too, the funny thing is when he was talking about Greenland, I mean, he tried to downplay what he's asking for, right? Because he said, look, it's not that big an ask, it's just a piece of ice, right? Who cares about Greenland? And he kind of admitted that, it's not about the natural resources because they're really, buried too deep beneath the ice to really have any value. He said it's all strategic. We need to have a base there. We need to, to protect America. We need to protect the world. But as he's talking about Greenland and say how it's just a piece of ice, all of a sudden he talks about Iceland, right? And then I'm thinking, Iceland, what's going on with Iceland? And he mentioned Iceland a couple of times before it dawned on me that he meant Greenland, that he was now confusing Greenland with Iceland. I assume he knows that there's another country that's actually called Iceland. I mean, even though he referred to Greenland as a big piece of ice, it's not Iceland because there's actually another country that has that name. So I was a little confused initially about what the hell, how did Iceland get involved until I realized that he was just mixing them up. But that wasn't the only kind of embarrassing part of his speech. I mean, the whole speech was an hour of rambling. I mean, most of it was just a bunch of lies about the U.S. economy and how great everything is, and just bragging about accomplishments that he really, didn't achieve. But it was all about how great he is, but also how great the United States is, and how the rest of the world is nothing without us. Okay? And I'm gonna get to that a little bit more in a minute because I want to just go back to what happened with the markets yesterday. So after the speech finally ended, right, and then he did some Q&A. So it wasn't just an hour. When you add the Q&A, it was like at least 90 minutes, right, of this rambling on. But later in the day, there was an announcement. I guess Trump put it out on Truth Social. He said, hey, I had a great talk with NATO, and we've got the makings of a framework of a deal or something like that on Greenland. And so no tariffs. I'm calling off the tariffs that were supposed to hit February 1st. No tariffs on Europe, all those countries that I was going to tariff, right? Now that I've got this framework of some kind of deal, everything is fine. This is, less than 24 hours, before nothing was fine, right? And, these tariffs were going to stay in place. Then they were going to go up to 25%. If we didn't get to own Greenland, now I'm making a mistake. But I thought that, the markets, right, tanked when this happened, right? Gold almost went negative, not quite. I mean, it got down to, I think, up less than $10 before rebounding up about $50. Silver did go negative. It went, negative a couple of bucks. And the gold stocks lost a lot of their gains. And I think that spooked a lot of people because they thought, the reason gold was up, the reason silver was up is because people were afraid that we actually would invade Greenland. I mean, I never thought that we would invade Greenland. The problem that I had was the fact that we put that possibility out there, right? That we let the world know that we could invade Greenland. And if we did, there's nothing anybody can do about it. That's basically what Trump said, right? It's just our own benevolence, right? You just have to trust, that I wake up in a good mood. Because if I wake up in a bad mood, you never know, right? Where we could invade. And so that was the big problem, not the fact that we were going to invade Greenland, but the fact that we actually discussed it openly as if it was going to happen or as if it might happen. That was the problem. And so the sell-off that we had yesterday helped lay the foundation for this huge rally today because it gave people the opportunity to buy a dip. And now today we have this huge rally to new all-time record highs in gold and silver, a strong day in the mining stocks, and weakness across the board in the U.S. dollar. Because, anybody who actually watched that speech and watched the president, right, basically tell the whole world that they're nothing without America. America is everything and the world is nothing. That without America, the world doesn't even work, right? That countries can't even survive. I mean, Trump talked about the fact that he could bankrupt other countries. He said, I thought about maybe bankrupting Switzerland, by jacking up the tariffs and making them really high and putting them out of business. Like he actually thinks that when he puts tariffs on these countries, the countries pay these tariffs. He thinks that America can destroy every country simply by taxing them with tariffs, right? And that the world doesn't work without America because Americans do all the shopping. Americans are the buyers. We're the ones that borrow all this money. In fact, he said that he thinks we should have the lowest interest rates in the world, as if he's almost ordering it, because he thinks we're so vital to the global economy. We're so important that we should be able to borrow at a lower rate than anybody anywhere else in the world. I don't know how he plans on trying to bring that reality about. But if you watched it, the reaction that I would have is, I'm getting out of U.S. assets. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, and I'm going to sell U.S. stocks. He bragged about the U.S. stock market. I mean, he predicted it was going to double, right? That Dow was going to go to 100,000. He says it's going to hit 50,000, then it's going to double. He was very proud of the fact that the stock market keeps going up. Now, it wasn't that everything the president said was a lie or just a gross exaggeration or, about embellishing his accomplishments. I mean, there were a few true statements that sprinkled around. Like he did mention the fact that growth doesn't cause inflation, which is true. It doesn't cause inflation. And he did mention that growth can fight inflation, which it does. Growth lowers prices, right? That's what it does. Real economic growth leads to lower prices. The problem is we don't have real economic growth under Trump. We just have more fake economic growth. So if we had genuine prosperity, then yes, the inflation would not be a concern. But he kept repeating the fact that there's no inflation at all, that he's brought down the budget deficit by, 27%, the trade deficit by 77%. This stuff isn't true. I mean, maybe if you go from the high point of the trade deficit to the low point of the month where we had a massive export of gold and it just skewed the whole numbers, maybe that could be close to true. But it's disingenuous in that the trade deficit is still going to be over $1 trillion. He said, we had a record trade deficit last year. Yeah, we had record trade deficits every time he was president the first time. And we're still going to have trade deficits over $1 trillion. And, we actually got inflation news that came out today. We got the personal consumption expenditures. And in there you have the PCE, which is the Fed's favorite way to measure inflation. Right? Now, I think it's the favorite because it's the least accurate, because I think it understates it the most. But it came out hotter than expected. Year over year, the PCE is up 3%. And even the core, if you strip out food and energy, the core PCE year over year is up 3%. They were expecting 2.7. 3% is 50% above their target. And it's rising. What is this telling you? Rates are too low. Donald Trump wants them to be lower. The Fed is talking about cutting them, but the markets are screaming that they need to be raised. And that's another reason that gold and silver prices are soaring, because the precious metals markets are letting everybody know that interest rates are too low. They need to be much higher, but they're not going to go higher. They're not going to get raised at all for a number of reasons. And so this bull is just getting started. And I know there are people that are saying, well, maybe isn't it like 2011, when gold peaked out at 1900 and silver was like 45, 46? No, because 2011 was following a 10-year period where silver went up 10x. Silver went from under $5 to almost $50. Gold went from under 300 to 1900. We went sideways for 12 years. Gold just broke out last year. 2024 was the first year of this move for gold. 2025 was the first year for silver. We are early in the breakout. We have years and years ahead of this move and multiples of the current move. And really, the mining stocks are just in the process of breaking out. Their breakout year is 2026, even though they had a great year in 2025, even though they tripled. The silver stocks tripled, or the mining stocks at least more than doubled. But even though they did that, their earnings went up much more than the stock price. So they ended the year cheaper than they began. So I think this is the year that they're going to finally really accelerate. And so we're early. Anyway, I got a quick commercial break. I got a lot more to talk about from the president's speech, so stick around. We're coming right back.